Now, please join me for a fireside chat on insurance's GenAI revolution, a business perspective. We will have, once again, the Snorkel AI CEO and co-founder, Alex Ratner, and he will be joined by the global head of emerging technology at QBE Ventures. He's an innovation and disruption specialist and futurist. And before joining QBE, he was the director of emerging and innovation technology and also entrepreneur in residence at AIG. So please join me in welcoming to the stage here, Alex Taylor. A fun fact about Alex, he was briefly pursued by the MPAA for writing one of the original Nutella clients in the early days of P2P file sharing. It sounds like an exciting time, Alex. For our audience, I'd like to remind you that both of these Alexes will be joining us for that live Q&A panel. So please post your questions in the Q&A. Alex and Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Alex, thank you so much for joining today. I briefly got scared because I was wondering what exploit I had done in my sleep without knowing about it. And then I realized that we, of course, share the same name. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on today. And, I'm excited to have kind of a pretty wide-ranging conversation. But maybe I'll cue it up and just, a lot of the theme today is, well, on the method side, it's about the importance of data and of if you think about simple ingredients in the cooking show of AI of models, algorithms, and data. A lot of the models and algorithms have kind of gone for most of us who are actually trying to build something real, gotten a lot more black box, a lot more commoditized, frankly, available. I mean that in the most positive sense. And often the bottlenecks for getting things to work across the last mile in real enterprise settings are the data. But I think I'll kind of start by maybe just asking you a little bit about what you see with your QBE hat on as the opportunity for AI, and then what some of the challenges that you think are unique in the enterprise versus a lot of the Twitter demos and academic benchmarks we see. We can start there, maybe.
Yeah. Look, and I suppose it's a really good starting point because we're in this transitionary period at the moment on the accessibility of models, particularly to people that don't have an engineering background, that don't have a data science background, that are suddenly realizing that their skills are just as applicable in this domain as they are in the domain that they're an expert in. And my industry, insurance, is particularly fascinating in this way. There's been a lot of discussions today around modes of data, structured versus unstructured. I think that insurance is the absolute center of the universe of different modes of unstructured information. Essentially, an insurance broker, bless them, will toss a packet of information, hundreds of pages long, over the fence to an insurer and say, insure this, whatever it is, figure it out, give me a price, and I'll put it to my customer. And we're at this stage now where suddenly, particularly underwriters who have built a lifetime of experience have realized that this generation of AI, particularly LLMs and related models, embedding models and so on, are able to be taught in the same way that a junior underwriter is. They can treat it almost like a human being to perform a task that was previously not only very time consuming, but only achievable by a human being. So, you made the point before, Alex, in the last talk around this generalizing of models. The center of the universe seems to be these behemoth models from OpenAI, from Anthropic, from Mistral. Yes, absolutely, we're seeing this capability generalization, but the ability to query information, to retrieve information, to perform basic reasoning on top of that information seems to be this superpower. And look, we're only really right now a year into people realizing this in general. And all of these use cases that are popping up in industries like banking and insurance, and all of these industries that have vast amounts of unstructured information or multimodal information, are coming out with all of these use cases that are going beyond these initial experiments that look promising to real examples that accelerate business processes, that improve customer servicing. There's so much distance to go, but so much promise already.
That's an awesome intro. You did way better than my basic very generic question deserved. But that's awesome. I mean, a couple things to unpack as we go through. If we get time for them. I mean, the heterogeneity of unstructured data, and also just the way that the structure of a specific industry impacts it, I think is fascinating. A lot of people think about that you don't realize that it's literally baked into the kind of, structure of a specific vertical or a specific kind of use case, that you might have all these different almost adversarial formats and diversities of data, all of which or most of which are not out on the internet for models to kind of memorize or learn about. So we may touch on some of how you deal with that in a bit. The idea of retrieving and extracting from that data, as well as maybe using it to tune these models to go beyond the kind of junior underwriter or undergrad level, I think is a fascinating area. And I know we had a talk earlier about some of the work that we're doing at Snorkel on not just tuning an LLM model, but tuning a retrieval model. Actually, a fun anecdote from, then I'll get back on track, but a brief aside from our last LLM summit that some of you may have been at, Dawe Kiela, who's one of the lead authors on the original RAG paper, kind of made the point that in the original paper that coined the term RAG, the way that people use RAG now is actually just to kind of was the baseline. And actually tuning your RAGs to know how to retrieve and how to embed your specific data is actually one of the key steps to getting it to work. So there's tons of both value, but also depth to getting those things to work. Maybe we'll go back to it. But just to start, I mean, I'd love to, to re-anchor it on the real value, because, obviously there's a lot of academic and method stuff in this summit, but it's, we're also trying to bridge it to the real impact. How have you seen lines of business kind of impact the implementation of common Gen AI tools like RAG, in your area and at QBE?
Yeah, and it's almost amusing at the moment that a lot of consumers of technology in this space kind of see RAG as the end game. And, I'll tell them now they're in for a big surprise in 2024, as multimodality becomes common, as agent-based systems become more common. But look, RAG is a useful starting point because it's understandable. People can immediately say, well, this is the process a human goes through. We look at a large corpus of information, we select a subset of that, we inject that into our minds or into the context of the model, and we interrogate that to get to a transitionary point of value. That's essentially what an underwriter in insurance does, what someone looking at a loan application does in banking, all of these different use cases. But to your point, the interesting thing that we're starting to see is around the evolution necessary of these models in order to make them generally useful in domains of information that might not have been part of the training data set. And people forget that it's not just about the generative language model, it's also about the vectorization process and the embedding model as well. I mean, one of the things that I was looking at quite recently was that the use of acronyms common in a particular industry domain or even within an organization. You can't retrieve information that the model hasn't been exposed to previously because it won't embed it appropriately. Making sure that we get this evolution of models, but also the ability to fine-tune models. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Companies are starting to realize that we've got these great general purpose models, they're behemoths, up to trillions of parameters, but it might not perform very well if it's not aware of the information domain or the question domain that you have to put in front of it. And it's actually one of my favorite things to do with models at the moment is in the structured response you ask a model to provide, getting it to give you a reason why it behaved in a particular way. Because not only does that let you iterate on a prompt, it lets you understand what the model itself doesn't know. And that can be a great way of moving into fine-tuning on the models on both sides of the equation in RAG. And in some cases, giving it exposure to corporate information, to giving it access to, not just the information itself, but prior examples of what human beings have done in similar situations to improve the performance of the model later on. And the thing that I love about this space is that process I've just described that we take the models through is almost identical to the process that we take human beings through to train them.
Yeah.
And it's this alignment between the human process and the machine process that I think has got a lot of people paying attention now.
It's super interesting. I mean, I think, I'm always, especially before this current wave, have always been hesitant to rely too much on kind of human metaphor and on anthropomorphizing the systems, because it can lead to error modes as well, especially in past iterations. But a lot of these metaphors to the way that LLM-based systems are currently constructed are just so apt, and I like that. I mean, just as another little tangent, but I think I know one you and I have talked about before. This there's a lot of, still is, I guess, a lot of chatter about kind of fine tuning versus RAG. And I think it kind of misunderstands how the tools fit together, right? Fine tuning is kind of like teaching an underwriter how to make teaching an underwriter how to make better decisions with data. RAG is about accessing the data. And just like someone could memorize data that they might look up on Google, or they could Google something that they might have otherwise learned, like there's an overlap between what you can accomplish with fine tuning and what you can accomplish via RAG, but they're kind of complementary. You know, an underwriter or any professional has to retrieve data. That requires skill to understand, where do I look in a multi-hundred page document packet I got from the broker. That has to be tuned and learned. And then once they have the information, they have to understand and be tuned how to make the right decision for their domain, their company, their objectives. Now this segues into another topic that I'm always a broken record about. The first DARPA funding that Snorkel ever had back in maybe 2012, 2013 was a wonderful project called Simplex, that it was all about how the data scientist and the SME, the subject matter expert, collaborate. We view that as critical, right? How can you teach the model to go from, call it, undergrad trained on the internet or junior underwriter level to senior underwriter level without looping in not just the data, but the people who know all that stuff, say the senior underwriters. So in that line, like, what have your experiences been? How do you see those subject matter experts and the data science teams working together at QBE and just in general to tune and advance AI?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And, I think that the initial answer is that until recently, it was a challenge to get the two teams to even talk to each other because they didn't see a connection between their domains of expertise or a way of making them accessible to each other. It's been one of my favorite things, particularly with LLMs, to throw subject matter experts that are non-technical into the deep end. So we ran an internal hackathon in Hong Kong about 11 months ago now. So right at the beginning of the public visibility of this wave of LLMs. And we said to a team of people in the room, they were marine cargo underwriters, they were customer service people, they'd never written a line of code in their life, nor did they really want to. And we said, over the next 3 days, you're going to create a system that helps with the process that you go through every day. And we said to these underwriters, what is the problem that you have? And they said, well, there's a limited team size of us, and we go through this process where it takes 5 hours to 3 days to review information to either decide not to underwrite this customer or to come up with something that approaches being able to create a premium for them, the rating process. And moving between what questions do you ask? How do you know what to ask of this information as a human being? We're going to sit here and watch you do this and record the questions you ask. Then we're going to take the same thing and put it into this fancy new black box that we'll call RAG for the time being. They didn't need to understand what that was. And as we put them up on a big screen at the front of the room, they started to see that the machine responded in a similar way to the way that they did. And, they could sit there and they could direct it and say, well, it's got this page of information. But when I asked this question, what I would actually look for is this page over here. And you say, well, why would you do that? How would you ask that question in a different way to be more focused on the information that you would actually take into account? And it's this iterative process where a data scientist is essentially laser focusing on the way that they're vectorizing content, the embedding model approach that they're using, and the way they're injecting context and phrasing something. I mean, people still can't believe that they can talk to a machine a little bit like they can with a human. But we're starting to see that people realize that even though they're speaking in words, yes, we call them tokens. The non-engineers don't need to understand that, but in the end, you're providing input into a model. You're letting it pay appropriate attention to the right tokens in the input, and that provides the right output. Obviously, yes, there's a highly technical reason for why these models perform as well as they do for that kind of use case, but because people happen to speak with words already, it's immediately accessible to people that don't have a machine learning, a data science background or mindset. And we're seeing this tremendous people-led collaboration as a result of this. People are clawing over each other to be the next use case in organizations like QBE, where we explore this technology, because they can immediately see what the application is and how this can be accelerated what they do today. Until literally the last 12 months, that would never have been the case. Yes, people were aware of data science, they were aware of machine learning, but they couldn't get over that initial hurdle to understand how something that they could have input into would be something that would drive the capability forward. Now that's all changed.
That's an awesome perspective. And I hadn't heard about that hackathon before, which is such an awesome example of a way to approach that. And also, I mean, actually, yeah, I think one of the first Snorkel experiences too, back at the Stanford lab, was sitting with, in our case, it was pediatric genomicists, and saying, why did the model get this wrong? What are you looking for? But there already, they were, very advanced on the computational side as well, and it was a very constrained domain. This ability to open up the accessibility of the first mile, and also just to pick on, or at least how I interpreted one thing you said, is this ability, even before you work on kind of solving a problem or getting it to production level, to scope the problem. What are you actually trying to accomplish? That's one of the trickiest questions, and I think most underrated in all of machine learning, which is, what do you actually want the model to do? Where does it fit into a human process? What are you trying to have it output? What are the standards for that output? And pre this kind of natural language interface, that it was a very difficult thing to do, and it was something it took a lot of upfront effort to do. Versus now, you can kind of just start playing around, and sometimes after that playing around and giving a little bit of feedback, it's good enough and great. You ship that to production. Sometimes you then need to go, often in a domain like we live in, you need to go, or domains like we live in, like insurance. You need to go further. You need to then, fine tune or distill or tweak. But that first mile part of getting the subject matter experts engaged, having them give some input, having them give feedback, having them buy into the problem and the part of the process. I sound like some kind of hack marriage counselor, but when I look at data science orgs, I say, like, if the subject matter experts who know how to solve the problem and the data science teams are separated, not going to work, never going to work. So getting them involved at square one,
We're going to see the next evolution of this quite soon, I think, as people start to realize that the power of and the necessity for fine-tuning. This interplay between questioning why a model performed in a particular way and then understanding how we might need to expose it to different training material, different source data sets to make it perform better in a particular domain. There was a really good example I saw the other day. One of our engineering teams, they look at architectural plans a lot, and giving even a multimodal vision model access to an architectural plan and then asking it about how big is this room, where's this room located, what's the projection like. Some of the state-of-the-art models, GPT-4 Vision performs pretty well in that domain, but it could still be better. Understanding why it doesn't perform well for certain tasks inform what you might do either in a smaller, more focused model, or what material it might need to see to behave a little bit more the way you would expect when a human was looking at a similar diagram. So this next phase, I think, is going to be subject matter experts having input into the training data corpus to fine-tune a model.
I mean, as I couldn't agree more. I mean, but I like that highlight of it's not just, it's certainly not like just about a fancy fine-tuning algorithm. It's about the data and it's about the subject matter experts, because, like we chase after leaderboards, and we just followed a talk or two back about some cool results there in the public domain, just like anyone else in the AI space. But they're never going to tell you where the gaps are in your domain and where the focus points are in your domain. Your subject matter experts are going to. And once you get that, you can fine-tune models, you can distill them to be smaller and more efficient, as you were indicating. And so I couldn't agree more that it's about that data development, the fine-tuning, but also how the subject matter experts are leaned in to that process and leading it really with the data science teams. So again, Rebecca is the hook. That means that we're about to run out of time. Rebecca, do you have maybe time for one last quick hitter for Alex, or are we hard stop now?
Yeah, if you both want to share some closing thoughts, that would be great.
Awesome. So I think, I was going to ask, I have a million more questions. I think there's some Q&A questions about, more specific use cases. Maybe we can talk about that if you're around for the Q&A, cool research advancements. Maybe I'll just, I'll cede my time on the floor for the other Alex. Any closing thoughts, and then especially just kind of how you're thinking about, given the regulation in insurance, kind of balancing this jump right into the deep end, go explore, with the kind of responsibility aspects. It's a huge topic. We can leave most of it for Q&A, but if you have any kind of closing thoughts on that, and then the broader opportunity before we segue into the Q&A.
For sure. So I'll keep it brief. So 2024 is going to be an exciting time where we see moving on from this general capability of language models that people have suddenly realized is here, even though it's arguably been around between 7 years and 20 years, depending on how you look at it. But combinations of capabilities, particularly multimodality, mixture of experts, agent-based systems of cooperative problem solving. Now, all of these things are going to keep blowing people's minds as to what's possible. But of course, as you introduce more components into the mix, it creates a space for more careful fine-tuning, for more careful combinations of capabilities. So there's a lot of blank space in improving the way that these systems perform, and I predict that'll happen over the next 10 years or so. On the regulatory side, of course, that's a topic we could talk about all day, but the one comment I'll make here is that we're seeing a lot of similarity in the statements being made by regulators globally and the questions they're asking. The thing that gives them most comfort at the moment is oversight. As long as you're saying that there's a human being appropriately licensed in their legislative environment in that jurisdiction to make sure that the model is performing appropriately, even on aggregate decision making, then you're generally okay. And the thing that I don't think I've seen anybody say at the moment is that we're letting models make decisions entirely on their own behalf, their own accord, and it's not supervised. That would be a very dangerous space to be. Over time, though, I think we're seeing this emergence of systems that makes it easier to oversee model performance. And there's a lot of companies starting to be very successful in that space.
That's fascinating. So great segue into the Q&A. I mean, I'll just quickly say, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. I could have asked you a million more questions, but maybe we'll get some of them in the Q&A, although that'll be up to the audience. But again, thank you. And Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.